Welcome to The Dirt on Organic Farming, a podcast from the Organic Agronomy Training Service. Our aim is to bring skeptical agronomists and crop consultants into the organic conversation by analyzing 6 common criticisms and openly discussing the sometimes messy promise of the organic opportunity. The podcast format combines expert interviews with real-world examples to get beyond us versus them and towards a more informed understanding of organic agriculture. I'm Nate Powell-Palm.
And I'm Mallory Krieger.
We're the hosts of The Dirt on Organic Farming.
One of the common criticisms is related to yield, because as conventional, chemically intensive farming systems transition, there can be a yield drop.
The main skepticisms I hear, one, can organic produce enough food? And why is the price of organic higher than conventional?
In this episode, double the acres, half the yield. Organic can't feed the world. General Mills is a proud sponsor of oats. As the largest producer of natural and organic packaged food in the U.S., the company is committed to supporting farmers in transitioning to organic and promoting continuous improvement of organic standards and practices. Learn more at generalmills.com. Oats is brought to you with funding support from Stonyfield. As the country's leading organic yogurt maker, Stonyfield takes care with everything it puts into its products and everything it keeps out. By saying no to toxic, persistent pesticides, artificial hormones, antibiotics, and GMOs, Stonyfield is saying yes to healthy food, healthy people, and a healthy planet for 38 years. Stonyfield is a certified B Corp and is also helping to protect and preserve the next generation of farmers and families through programs like its direct milk supply and Wolf's Neck organic training program, as well as Stony Fields, a nationwide multi-year initiative to help keep families free from toxic, persistent pesticides in parks and playing fields across the country. So many times throughout this series, we have run into the topic of yields. And you know this as well as I do, Nate, that making a high yield is a real marker of success for farmers. It brings a sense of joy and pride in a job well done, and it also brings with it some more revenue with more crops sold. And there's also a certain feeling of satisfaction in providing food for people.
Well, and on top of that, I think there's really sort of, a cultural currency that goes with it. When you're sitting in the coffee shop talking to your buddies during harvest, when you're rained out, what do you talk about but how many bushels you're getting per acre? What is that gross yield? And I think in a big way, messaging from all sides, from land-grant universities, from your chemical companies, everybody's really encouraging the farmer and marking, setting that benchmark of success at maximizing yield. And so farmers, fairly, I think we all think about it is our obligation and it's our foremost duty to feed the world, to maximize yield so everybody can eat.
Yes, and many farmers really take that message to heart, that getting that high yield means that they're doing their part. There's also this perception about organic farms particularly, that they have really low yields. And so if too many farmers were to transition to organic, there wouldn't be enough food to feed the growing world population. There's some estimates out there that we're going to need to double agricultural output by 2050 just to keep up with population increases.
And I think that's really that conversation right there, where we're talking about growing population, everyone's obligation to feed the world. Those are real, very, very real criticisms of the challenges facing us. How do we overcome these really large hurdles to keep humanity fed and whole? But anecdotally, I do wonder, I travel to a lot of farms. I see a lot of pretty incredible yields, sometimes yields on organic farms that eclipse conventional yields. And I'm just sort of wondering, what's the data say as far as what is that actual yield drag? And what are we looking at if we did go from a math perspective, go all organic? What does that look like from a calories available?
Those are some really great questions, Nate. And to kick off our conversation, I reached out to a food systems expert and soil scientist at Washington State University named Dr. John Reganold. And I asked him, what does it mean to feed the world?
Well, to me, it means that we need to feed a population now, which is 7.8 billion. That's a lot. That will likely increase to anywhere from 9 to 10 billion in 2050, which is just 30 years away. And we need to do it in a sustainable fashion. So it's not just the quantity of food that we put out, meaning yield, but it's also the quality of food. So does it, is it safe, few to no pesticide residues? Is it nutritionally dense, vitamins, minerals? So productivity and quality is one area. Is it environmentally sound? How is it in the area of energy? Is it using low energy? Is it non-polluting, meaning nitrogen, phosphorus? Is it good for biodiversity? Those kinds of things for environment. Economics, is it profitable to the farmer? Meaning, can the farmer or farm family make money from this enterprise in feeding the world? And then, of course, and maybe most importantly, I mean, all these factors are supposedly equal, but social well being is a big deal. Are workers being paid a fair wage? Are they treated fairly? Do they have a 401k plan, medical, retirement, those kinds of things? And so I look at it in those four areas. It's not just can we produce enough food? Because we're finding now that in just concentrating on food production, it's not enough. We're causing too much harm to the environment. So we have to take many factors into account.
Though many aspects of organics are very positive, Dr. Reganold did confirm that organic does generally have lower yields.
When you start talking about yields, that's where organic tends to fall down compared to conventional. Now, part of that reason, so for example, when I say lower yield, what do I mean? There have been a number of yield studies done by scientists comparing yields of organic and conventional. And I mean, probably it's 100, 200 studies. And when you put those into, you aggregate them and do a meta analysis of those, in general, organic is about 15 to 20% less production than conventional. That's across all crops. Now, I could say that to a group of farmers, and a farmer could get up in the audience and say, "Hey, I'm organic, and I know I produce 30% more than my neighbor." And that would be true. And a conventional farmer could get up and say, "Hey, I know I produce 40% more than my neighbor." And all that's taken into account in these studies. There's a wide range, but in general, the yields are lower with organic.
Though yield drag does vary by crop type.
When you think of that 15 to 20% lower yield, it's not the same across the different variety of crops. So, for example, if you're interested, in grains, the land area in agriculture, in cropland across the globe, 70% of that land is in grains. So it's big, has big impact on the environment, and it has a big impact in calories that are produced. So when we think of cereals, we think of wheat and rice and corn. Well, corn and rice do pretty well with organic. Maybe they're anywhere from 9 to 12% lower yield from what studies show. But wheat doesn't do well, and wheat and corn are the two big crops. And when I say corn, maize, basically, in the world. And wheat is generally 30 to 40% lower in yield. So it's lower than that 15 to 20% figure.
So, as an organic inspector, I have the opportunity to travel to a lot of different farms around the country, and ultimately, from my experience, it seems like organic farmers are, on the whole, being really quite productive. I see probably more exciting yields than I do poor, depressing yields. I know from my own experience, the last 3 years, I've raised organic yellow peas, and year over year, they have outperformed quite a few of the conventional fields in the valley I grow in. And I realize, as Dr. Regnold said, it's just anecdotal, but it seems like there's movement here.
I also have the same impression that the yield gap is narrowing. And so I reached out to Jo Mirenda. She's the farm policy director at the Organic Trade Association. I wanted to get a sense from her about how current yields compare with historic numbers.
When we look at the science, we're seeing that the yield gap is shrinking as researchers better understand organic farming systems and have a better understanding of which management practices really can improve soil health. We see better yields in organic. Soil health is the driver of viable, productive organic systems. One of the keystone research studies that proves this point came out of the University of California, Berkeley, that did the largest meta study comparing organic and conventional yields. They studied over 1,000 different scenarios across crop types and geographies and countries. And they showed that the yield gap between organic and conventional farming systems, first of all, was much smaller than previous studies had shown. So over time, the yield gaps have been shrinking. They also noticed that two very specific organic management practices, multi-cropping systems and crop rotations, so practices that improve the diversity of farming systems, directly correlated to substantial decreases in that yield gap, reducing what is on average around 19% of a yield gap. The diversification cropping systems can drive that yield gap down to less than 10%.
So as Joe was just saying, the yield gap closes when we're ultimately benefiting the land, when the diversity of cropping systems, when the quality of soil improves, that organic yield goes up. And I think this is really kind of a theme throughout what we've heard, that the more diversity, the more healthy and robust a farm ecosystem we can create, ultimately the fatter our pocketbooks get as farmers, because we're creating a system that's we're harnessing Mother Nature, not just trying to suppress and manipulate.
Yes. And you know what's more exciting is that there are actually really common circumstances where organic outperforms conventional yields. The Rodale Institute in Kutztown, Pennsylvania operates a long term farming systems trial that compares organic grain production with conventional plots on a side by side basis. And so I spoke with Dr. Andrew Smith, who's Rodale's chief operating officer and chief scientist, about their farming systems trial and what they have found over 40 years of collecting data.
This is work that we've done at Rodale Institute starting in 1981. So we just finished 40 years of the farming systems trial. I took a quick look at some of our yield data for the last 10 years. And what we've shown is that in the first 4 years, when we had a transition period, the conventional system out yielded the organic system. But since that time till today, and I went back and looked at our data from the last 10 years to verify this, we see no difference between the conventional system and at least the system. We have two organic systems. One is based on what we call a manure system, or a livestock based system where we're recycling composted dairy manure. And the other one is we call a legume system, where there has been zero external inputs during the entire 40 years. And all of the fertility has been based on leguminous green manures. That one has yielded lower levels, and we're considering making some changes that are more reflective of what modern organic farmers are doing as far as fertility management going forward. But what we found, one of the biggest reasons why there has not been a yield drag, is that in your typical year, if you get perfect rainfall and everything's right, the conventional yields actually are higher than the organic yields. But that's just not the truth. And that's what happens if you do a study for 2 or 3 years. You can't really get an understanding of what's going to happen over 40 years, which is a lifetime of a career for a farmer. But every single year that there is drought or low rainfall, the organic system out yields the conventional system. But I haven't seen a model yet that puts our data where we're showing that during periods of drought, we don't increase yield, we just maintain yield during periods of drought, which suggests that as going forward with climate uncertainty, we should just expect that organic yields could equal or actually outcompete a conventional system. And that's really mostly driven by improved soil health, which has the ability to hold on to more moisture and also hold on to nutrients and make them available to plants during a low moisture situation. But also, when we get high rainfalls, we actually have less ponding and more ability for that water to get into the ground and not run off and cause erosion. So I think those are some things that give me hope. And like I said before, I think we haven't even really started to do research on organic systems. We're a research institution that is 100% devoted to improving organic systems, and we were one of a few until maybe 15, 20 years ago when universities and other institutes started to jump into the game. So we're really just at the beginning of our understanding and are beginning to fine tune maybe a non-chemical farming approach.
So, Mallory, as you know, I farm in a bit of a drier climate than, say, you lucky folks east of the Mississippi. But there is a consistent worry about the weather. I think all farmers worry about the weather, that you're just not going to get the rains at the right time. And so, hearing that overall, the data is suggesting organic systems are more resilient to weather variability just brings quite a bit of relief, to my confidence that I can farm going forward, and that future generations are going to be able to farm with some amount of systemic improvement on the farms that's going to make it so that they're more viable in the future. And so as we look at how weather's going to change. I mean, we've got so many variables, from big floods to snowstorms to historic droughts all over the place, and in places that typically didn't experience a lot of those weather events. As those become more of a common occurrence, more of a way of life, I think that we could really ask, is organic actually more prepared for the future? Is organic going to be ready for the coming decades as a food system that's actually more consistent, resilient, and reliable to feed the growing population?
Yeah, I think organic does have a part to play in feeding the global population. But before organic can be a major player in feeding the world, there are many barriers that we need to work through and overcome, and a lot of work that has to be done to make organic ag more feasible at the farm level. And so Joe Mirenda pointed out that there's so much room for growth and innovation in organic. But what we really need to be able to realize all of that potential is investment.
Today, organic only comprises 6% of our food system. So we are a young and small, but very mighty sector of the food system. So a lot more investment and growth needs to be realized in order for the food system to really tap into the full potential of organic to meet the growing needs of a global population and meeting the food security needs. As I mentioned with the yield gap question, research that's focused on organic farming systems is critical, and especially research in long-term farming systems. Organic production is so grounded in soil health, and longer term studies need to allow for soil health to build up and provide that strong benefit through crop production and yields. Organic research is really important because the solutions that come out of organic research benefit all farmers. Organic farming systems, certified organic farming systems, have restrictions on what's allowed, what sort of inputs are allowed, what sort of production methods are allowed. And so it requires researchers and farmers to think outside the box and be creative in looking for solutions for weed control, disease control, pest control, building up soil health, and more. Those solutions can be used and can benefit both organic farmers and also conventional farmers that are looking to integrate more soil health building practices into their systems.
That is such an important point. Advancements in organic farming benefit all farmers who are committed to improving soil health. According to Dr. Smith, we could make significant strides with more investment in organic research, particularly in the area of weed management.
What we know from research is that what limits yields mostly, and what's causing this yield drag, is nitrogen availability. some other nutrient availability, and as well as an asynchrony, because a lot of the nutrients that are in an organic system are tied up, often held closely to soil organic carbon, and aren't always available for the plant. Now, that can be a bad thing for crop production, but it's a great thing for preventing leaching and things like nitrous oxide from entering into our air and causing air pollution and water pollution. But I think that if we can control weeds, which I can see a lot of things on the horizon, we will actually make significant improvements in nitrogen use efficiency, because a lot of times the weeds are stealing those nutrients and nutrients from the plant.
Along with these successful advancements in organic production practices such as weed management strategies, improvements in yield and the nutrient content of crops are needed in order to adequately feed the world. These can be achieved through changes in plant breeding priorities.
The other thing that I think that is important about as we consider improvements in organic agriculture is breeding for, what I might call ecological seed breeding. And this does get to the aspect of nutrition, because what we found is that despite the fact that we've had from let's see, it was from about 1960 to 2000, we had a doubling of the yields in grain, and about the same time a tripling in total food production output. What that resulted in is a decline in nutrients, the nutritional density or the nutritional concentration of our food. And this was clearly shown through large databases, USDA database and UK databases. And there's a strong negative correlation between yields and nutritional concentrations in food. And part of that is because we've been breeding for yield. And when you breed, especially grains for yield, if you think about it, we make them more efficient. They're more efficient in processing or photosynthesis, in processing atmospheric carbon dioxide and turn it into carbohydrates. So what we've done is we've diluted the nutrients in our food while we've actually concentrated the carbohydrates in our food. And I mean, I don't think you have to look around too hard or to look at our country and see that we have a epidemic of diabetes and obesity, and a lot of it is stemmed from how we produce our food. So we need to focus not only on breeding that improves nutritional density, but also that breeding that for varieties that work in a low input or an organic system. Because most of the breeding that was done over the last 70 years was for these varieties to respond to synthetic fertilizers. And then we do these studies where we compare them side by side and we say, oh, there's a 25% yield drag, but we have this racehorse over here that was meant to, go fast on synthetic inputs, and then we put it into a system where there's no synthetic input. So I think that's another one of the reasons why we're seeing yield drags in the organic system. But there also should be a focus not just on the ability for these crops to produce in organic systems, but also to improve the nutritional quality or the nutritional density of the food that we're eating.
And when we think about it, feeding the world is about more than just growing enough calories per person. It's also about providing adequate nutrients in those calories. And I think as a farmer, it's overwhelming to look at all of the research and all of the different, really wide-ranging complexities of organic farming, and expect to both manage and be a scholar about these topics as well. And so that's where in a way, I think like this growing body of knowledge, this growing world of folks who are themselves experts and possibly advisors to farmers could really play a role.
I'm glad you mentioned that. Joe Mirenda also sees a need for advisors and consultants for organic farmers.
The technical assistance that organic farmers need is critical, and it must be specific to the farming systems and the regionally specific aspects of where the farmer is farming, and also the financial aspects of organic farmers taking on that risk to go organic and to do what's right for the long-term food security of our planet. A lot more needs to be done in terms of policy solutions for organic farmers, farmers choosing to transition to organic. So the pitfalls for farmers that want to go organic and don't have those tools, whether it be research that they can apply on their farms or financial risk management tools or that organic expert they can call for help. Those are the pitfalls that we can solve and we need to address.
I'm not going to say it, but I'm going to say it. I've been saying since the beginning that we need more organic advisors.
Another criticism that I hear frequently about organic food is that it is too expensive and that because it's too expensive, it's never going to be able to be affordable for every person. So there's no way that we could actually feed the world with organics.
And this is a criticism that I think I have heard and thought about more than almost any other one. And the thing that I always get a little bit frustrated by is that in that discussion, we don't talk about the environmental costs of conventional farming.
Dr. Smith argues that same point, and he says that we're already paying for these costs through our tax dollars, and that organic food is actually less expensive than conventional food in the long run.
Well, the reality is that you don't pay the true cost of food at the store. Organic products are more expensive in the marketplace for the most part, and they're underpriced because if you were to capture the true external benefits of things of ecosystem services, increased pollinator habitat, improved air and water quality, reduced poisonings to farm workers, human health standards, you'd actually find that we're underpaying for organic products. And if you look at conventionally grown products, you'll find that you're actually overpaying because the external costs are not worked into that system. Taxpayers are basically bearing the burden of those external costs with cleanups in the Gulf of Mexico and wells that aren't undrinkable. So the public bears that burden. But another reason I really don't love that argument is because, 1960, we spent probably double on food than what we did on healthcare. Today, I believe we might spend 3 times as much on healthcare as we do on our food. I believe more recently we spent about $3.2 trillion on healthcare. It's expected to go somewhere like $5.6 trillion by 2025. And they estimate between 2015 and I believe it's 2050, we're going to spend something like $90 trillion on healthcare, which is like over 90% of the total federal budget during that same time period. So, why are we able to spend all this money for people to get drugs because they're unhealthy? Why don't we turn it around and have people eat healthy food, be healthy, so we don't have to bear the brunt of those healthcare costs?
One thing that's a little bit more sobering is that when we look at not only the environmental costs of conventional farming, just the commodity price of conventional crops is too low. It's too low for farmers to make a living. It's too low for farmers to pay off their debts. It's been too low for too many years. I mean, I remember, just in getting into farming that prices were good coming off the ethanol boom, but we have been really stagnant for a while. And so I think that's also another consideration. Why would we engage in a farming system that doesn't pay farmers a fair price?
That's a really good point, Nate. A lot of farmers are leaving the industry because they are, they're too indebted and they can't service their debt and the prices are too low. And if we keep losing farmers to things like debt or not replacing them because the costs of getting in are too high for the return on investment, our global food security will diminish. Organic farming is more profitable for farmers, and because it's more profitable, it provides a more reliable living for farm families. We can bring the next generation on the farm. It's more feasible for beginning farmers to enter the industry. Dr. Reganold has some research that really backs this premise up and provides evidence that organic agriculture is significantly more profitable than conventional agriculture on the whole.
There's one study done that actually it's called a meta-analysis, which basically takes all the studies that were done, and this was done in 2015. And I know quite a bit about this study because I was one of the 2 people that conducted this study. And What we did is we looked at all the studies done over the 40 years before, so 1975 to 2015, comparing organic with conventional in the financial performance area. You can do these meta-analysis where you put them all in the computer, all these different crops, their profits, their costs, and you can then you can basically standardize everything where you can compare apples with oranges. And what we found is that if you want to look at net returns, which a lot of people do, organic farming was anywhere from, I think it was something like 24 to 35% more profitable. And that takes into account inflation, which you have to do as an economist. Some economists like cost benefit ratios. When you do that, I think it was 20 to 25% more profitable. That is, the organic farmers were. Now, this is, over a whole bunch of crops and enterprises. This was pretty interesting. So then you say, well, oh, okay, they get a premium, those organic farmers. Yep, they do. And what we found over the 40-year period of time, and this was the biggest surprise to me, was that premium has stayed the same. So, in other words, that premium, they call it the farm gate premium, was about 30%.
Joe pointed out that the organic premium isn't only about the cost of production.
And it also reflects all of those embodied environmental benefits that growing the organic food is providing to our ecosystems through healthier soil, less erosion, cleaner water. So the organic premium is reflecting that organic food is different. It's a value. It's an indicator of the better food product, the better agricultural system. And consumer demand has been growing drastically for purchases of organic food over the years. Organic is the fastest growing sector of agriculture. And so these are indicators that consumers are willing to pay that organic premium and recognize what that organic premium is worth is worth to themselves as consumers, to their families, and to their environments. Now, making organic accessible to everyone is something that doesn't have easy answers, but that doesn't mean it's not worth it to strive for better, more sustainable agricultural practices. As we think about solutions for the future, we don't want to necessarily have a race to the bottom on prices. Cheaper food is not the answer. So, having food systems that reflect the full food production and distribution systems and takes into account those externalities on the environment and on long-term human health is important. And and also we need to think about making sure farmers are paid fair prices and that farm workers are paid fair prices. Those factors is not something we want to throw away as we look towards having more accessible food. I think we need to be creative with answers and look for food system solutions that encompass true pricing of food.
Accessibility is a question. I think as an organic farmer that when I talk about how is my product ultimately ending up on store shelves and how is it accessible to my community members, there is that question that it looks very expensive when it hits the store shelves. The thing that I have to sit with is that the price I receive at the farm gate is still pretty low compared to the price that the food item costs when it hits the shelf. So there is a decent amount of value added activity down the supply chain. And I think that the solutions to price accessibility aren't the sole responsibility of the farmer. And it's not on us to just keep taking lower and lower prices to make organic food accessible. We need to be paying living wages. We need to be looking at where money is leaving the farm, being siphoned out of the system. And as a community, as a farming community, figure out how do we plug those leaks and ultimately retain more money on farm, but still make food more accessible.
Absolutely. When we're trying to address this accessibility question, we need to look within the food system, but we also need to look outside of the food system because there are economy-wide questions that are leading to, you know, people's inability to afford basic supplies for their family. We've spent a lot of time talking about how the organic premium has provided higher profitability for farmers and a better living for their farm families. But to your point, Nate, rising tide lifts all boats. The benefits of organic farming's higher profitability extend beyond the farm and to whole communities.
In terms of economic viability, there is a growing body of research about how organic agricultural activity can positively influence economic factors within a community. I'm referring to a study on organic hotspots from researchers out of the Penn State University who identified counties in the United States that have high activity of organic agriculture and are also surrounded by other counties that also have high levels of organic agricultural activity, and looked at those counties and how key socioeconomic factors were impacted. The results of that study identified over 200 organic hotspots in the United States, and that those hotspots were correlated with increases in median household incomes, over $2,000 difference, in fact, and also reductions in poverty levels within those counties, reducing poverty by 1.35% percentage points, which might seem small, but it's actually a greater reduction in poverty than some national anti poverty programs. So, this study really shows that organic agricultural activity is not only great for the environment, but it's also a driver of rural economic development. If we think about policies and resources and support for organic farmers, we're getting so much more out of that agricultural activity than just the yields or the food products.
So I'm wondering, Mallory, could we make a t-shirt that says feeding the world isn't just about yield? There's a lot to be said that if we don't have farmers in business, there is going to be no feed in the world. There's going to be no food. Farmers need to be able to have viable businesses in order to raise the food we all eat. And so when we think about the practices that farmers conduct while organic and the resiliency that is built into organic practices, it makes for an overall more robust, more active, and more resilient food system.
Dr. Reganold hopes that more farmers will start taking all of these other factors like environmental benefits into account when they're making decisions on their farm.
For so long, when you ask a farmer, you say to a farmer, "Hey, how's it going?" "Oh, I had, this is in Eastern Washington. I had 80, 90 bushels of wheat this year." You don't hear them say, and this would be true in Kansas and other places, "Hey, you know what? I didn't have any erosion this year. I had good yield, no erosion, and my energy use was way down, and my workers were happy." You don't hear that. Instead, you usually hear, "Well, this was my yield."
Dr. Reganold acknowledges that yields are important and that we do need to continue to increase organic yields, but we want to make sure that we do so while preserving these additional benefits of organic agriculture.
Well, you might say, "Well, wait a minute. Okay, so we got to increase the yields, but we want to make sure if we do increase the yields with organic, we're not doing it at the cost of the environment. We're not doing it at the cost of the profitability to the farmer. And we're not doing it at the cost of how the workers are treated." And so when I think of organic, I think, okay, it has lower yields, but it has all these other benefits. I think of it's one of the more innovative systems that meets those criteria, complete criteria. It balances those sustainability criteria better than almost any system. But with that, it still can improve.
I don't think I'm alone when I say that we probably shouldn't have a system that incentivizes farmers to degrade the planet just in order to get a paycheck. I think we need to fairly expect farmers to feed the world while improving the world. And that means giving the farmers a fair price for practices that protect workers, increase pollinator habitat, and overall improve the soil that we use to grow the food.
Dr. Smith sees urgency in investing in organic farming systems and finding ways to improve them so that we can continue to see these added benefits.
I don't just think that organic agriculture can feed the world. I think it has to, because the way we're producing food now just can't continue. We're polluting and contaminating the world, and we're contaminating ourselves. Someone made a statement from the United Nations that we only have approximately 60 harvests left if we continue to have soil degradation. But I was at another conference that said, forget 60 years. With the amount of chemical contamination, most men in the world are going to be sterile in 40 years because of all the endocrine disruptors that we're emitting into the environment. So we really need to have a shift and a change.
Well, then, if that's not a wake up call, I'm just not sure what is. I think that there is so much to unpack here and to digest, and I hope that our listeners get the opportunity to maybe listen to our experts a couple of times because there is a lot of great information here. But I'd be interested, Mallory, of all that we heard, what would you say the primary takeaways are?
Yeah, so my three big takeaways that I want our listeners to really take home from this episode are: number one, the organic yield gap is closing more and more with every year. And so we're seeing increased production coming out of organic systems. Number two, organic production is more resilient to climate and weather instability, and therefore organic provides more reliability for the source of our food as we're seeing more uncertain weather patterns happen in the future. Also, along the lines of number two, organic provides more ecosystem services, resulting in a healthier environment for all of us humans to enjoy alongside the plants and critters that we cohabit this earth with. And number three, organic is more profitable, and that profitability leads to more food security because more farmers can stay in business. When we put all of this together, it means that organic can and should be a major player in the effort to feed the world going forward. And Dr. Smith summed this last point up really well.
My hope is that humans are healthier, the environment's healthier. And I mean, one story that to me is exciting on our farm over the Christmas break, my wife and I were sitting there and we heard this screeching, and we looked out the window and there was a bald eagle that was going over our wetlands. And when we moved to our farm, it had been almost continuous corn for probably 40 or 50 years. And probably every single year I noticed a new species of bird or some sort of wildlife. We now have coyotes and foxes and just about everything running around. And now we have bald eagles. That tells me that the land is healing because of the way that we're managing it. And so when we talk about can organic feed the world, I really don't like this idea that we have to produce high intensive production in one area and degrade that land while we preserve other land for nature. Because farming and agriculture and wildlife and humans really should all coexist together.
That was episode 4 of The Dirt on Organic Farming, a new podcast by the Organic Agronomy Training Service. OATS provides organic grain production training to agronomists, advisors, and crop consultants so that farmers will have better access to reliable, science-based advice for their unique farm operation. Special thanks to Joe Mirenda, Dr. Andrew Smith, and Dr. John Reganold. This episode was produced by Michaela Elias. For more information, go to www.organicagronomy.org. OATS is brought to you with funding support from Cliff Bar. Cliff Bar's journey to use organic ingredients started in 2003. We've learned along the journey that organic can be a catalyst for good. It is key to creating a healthier, more just, and sustainable food system for all of us. Organic farming is good for people and the planet. We've also learned that organic farming is innovative and can play a critical role in feeding a growing world. In order to do that, organic has to continue to improve. That's why we are the #1 private funder of organic research in the US and fund projects like OATS. We are proud to be working along with all of you to ensure that organic is here to stay for good and for generations to come. OATS is brought to you with funding support from King Arthur Baking Company, who has been sharing the joy of baking since 1790. A certified B Corp, headquartered in Vermont, King Arthur is the ultimate baking resource, providing the highest quality ingredients for the most delicious baked goods. As a 100% employee-owned baking company, we believe in the power of baking to make a difference for our employee owners, the larger baking community, and the planet. We strive to be a force for good in all that we do, from cultivating a workplace that embraces differences and prioritizes trust, to teaching children across the country how to bake bread from scratch, to partnering with farmers and suppliers who share our vision for a greener planet. Oats is a programmatically independent consortium that is fiscally sponsored by the Organic Trade Association. OTA serves as an anchor funder for oats through its industry-invested Grow Organic Research, Promotion, and Education program. Grow Organic's Technical Assistance Program area seeks to meet goals of scalability, regional, and production system diversity in technical assistance for organic and transitioning farmers nationwide. Top donors to the Grow Organic Technical Assistance Program area help make oats possible. Thank you to General Mills, Cliff Bar, Stonyfield, King Arthur Baking Company, and Organic Valley. I'm Mallory Krieger.
And I'm Nate Powell-Paul.
Till next time, thanks for listening.